we're here in Ballyduff, Lismore area with James Foley in Cooley Duty Farm, and this is a dairy farm. So James, thanks very much for having us, and tell me about your farm.
You're very welcome, Sean. Yeah, we're actually kind of a blow into this area. We bought this farm in 2000, so we've originally from outside the town of Dungarvan, and this is 20 miles away. So we still are farming in 2 locations, but this is the main home farm now. We had to put up sheds and that kind of stuff. So but it would have been tillage and dairy and beef and sheep, like I suppose most farms previous to us buying it. But we had we were into cows, so we were always dairy farmers. We probably would have grown whole crops and that kind of stuff as well, maize. But we, since we came here, we were kind of more grass because we had a smaller quota relative to the amount of land. So the situation in Dungarvan was we were very, very intensive, 10,000 litres a cow kind of thing. We came up here, we were kind of more focused on getting as much as we could from grass, but we never gave up the little bit of tillage for whole crops mostly.
All for your own self.
All for our own selves. We never sold anything off the farm, any crops that off the farm. So yeah, but now we're milking around 200 cows now. And we've kind of stayed steady with the last 3 or 4 years after a jump from maybe around 100 cows in the end of quotas in 15. So,
but you've moved the grassland element of this on, or maybe in the sense of, we'll say, you're one of the first people I've come across that has really grabbed, I suppose, the multi-species idea.
Yeah.
And maybe you can talk a little bit on that.
Yeah. I've been looking at it with probably nearly 10 years. I was actually looking through my emails the other day, and I actually emailed Cotswold Season 2014. So I'd seen this sort of mixed species stuff about that amount of time, but it kind of took till 2018 till I put in a full sward, but I had put in a red and white clover sward in 2016. And since then, we kind of haven't really looked back. We were happy with the very first crop. Now, we did experiment with different establishment techniques and stuff like that, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. But now we're kind of a little bit happier about how to establish it for us. And so the first field that we sowed in 2018 is still going. Now, a lot of the herbs and that are not there anymore, but we don't know if that's our management or if it's just, they may not be as persistent anyway. But at the same time, we have a field of a couple of types of clover and a few grasses, and it's quite productive. So I know people would have been worried about the persistency of it, but I suppose it's coming into its 5th year now next year. So it hasn't seemed to stop growing since. And that was the first field that we plucked up the courage to not put any nitrogen out on. So until then, we were pretty conventional with our nitrogen and fertilizer in general. And I suppose it's since we got enough confidence from the multi-species swards that we started to cut down on nitrogen.
And you're not doing any now, I hope?
No.
You took the plunge this year.
We're in conversion now since April, as I was saying to you earlier, the very last day.
Yeah.
So, I suppose I say we, it's a family farm, So between my father and mother and my wife Clodagh, we took the decision to go into organic, not lightly, to be fair, but we were looking like we were going that direction with a while. I suppose the biggest difficulty for us would be the changeover in feed, bought-in feed probably, because we were starting to get to a stage where we were trying to, with all these high prices for feed and fertilizer, we're trying to get to a stage where we could sell out pretty much and buy in very little. And it's not the easiest of tasks with dairy cows anyway, because it's very hard to keep them going without a little bit of meal or whatever.
Yeah, and it is a big challenge, I suppose, for the dairy sector. The other livestocks, like the beef and the sheep particularly, you can probably do it relatively easy at this stage.
Yeah.
And how are you managing that? Has the multi-species helped in that sense?
Yeah, Our forage element, I would say we haven't dropped at all in forage. We've probably gone up. Now I couldn't give you figures exactly on that, but especially the likes of this year, or any time there's a difficulty with cold or an extreme of any kind of way, this multi-species seemed to keep going. And definitely this year, I know a lot of my neighbours would have been feeding silage a lot sooner than us. Now, we still ended up feeding some silage, but this kept going. And, you know, this year we actually put in about 100 acres of multi-species. So out of, there's 260 acres here. So it was a big plunge in the spring. We actually took a bit of a risk with our silage and everything else. But when that started to come through, then we kind of didn't see any problems with our forage, you know. So we actually ended up, there was kind of 2 droughts this summer. The second one was worse than the first one, and there was a little bit of a break in between, a little bit of rain in between. But the first one we were actually caught worse than the second one. The second one was where most people around here were caught, like even the hills over on the other side were all brown. No, most of the country was like that, to be honest.
Most of the south of the country.
As far as I've been travelling this year now, and I haven't been travelling much in the last couple of years. But yeah, in the line of forages and all that, I feel that this, you know, we can manage away fine under organic with this kind of forage. It is a bit different, you know. It's no question. It's not as clean looking or whatever. And I know in organic you're
tolerant.
I suppose you have to change the mindset a little bit. But yeah, but with multi-species in general, you can't spray it. So. We were getting used to that anyway. So,
and I'm going to take you back to the winter feed, particularly for the cows in a second.
Yeah.
But before I say that, is on this journey that you started back, we'll say 10 years ago when you started looking at multi-species, did you find that just made it that wee bit easier to go organic then, because you had almost weaned yourself off the high inputs at that stage?
Yeah, like I think we were probably 80 or 90% of the way there already before we started. Now I know we've 2 years to go before we're certified organic, but now at the same time we were still feeding conventional feed. Any nuts we were buying in were all conventional all along. So in that end of things, you know, there's obviously a different standard, but you know, I suppose for what we were growing on our farm, you know, we were kind of, I'd say, most of the way there already. But now we you know, like we can talk about it later, I suppose, like you said, about the other whole crops and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, but I was interested when you said the winter feed. So are you going to change to summer dairy system? To reduce your requirement on organic feed, or have you another alternative that you're going to go for?
From what I can see of the market, there is a demand for fresh products all year. You know, so if you're talking about Glenisca or liquid milk or whatever, so yeah, I don't think most organic farmers are able to do that, are they? You know, that they just can shut up shop for the whole winter. But look, I know each farm is different, but we always were a winter milking herd, and I actually have no problem with calving cows in the winter. But like you said, the difficulty is the feed. So we were kind of planning that we could still. We're still trying to go down that road because of more so to do with the market and the fact that maybe not too many farmers are actually set up for it properly. And we're in the part of the country where we can grow our crops, apart from our pastures. Like.
So are you thinking that you'll grow enough grain here for your own winter feed? Is that what you're thinking?
That's the hope. Yeah. Now, what that means in practice is it probably means taking out land that we had in pasture already. You know, on this farm itself, the very top of the farm, the furthest away grazing block, we actually grew oil crops on it this year. So we didn't, you know, in terms of most years, we probably would have been cutting silage from those fields or grazing occasionally. So, but it cuts down on our pasture. So it may mean less cows overall, but in terms of, you know,
But your additional multi-species might compensate for your lack of grazing.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to be an optimist, you'd probably say we don't have to cut the stocking rate at all. But being realistic, especially in the first couple of years, we're not used to not having just feed on tap. And look, we probably would have been facing this anyway with the price of grain. I know the liquid price was lagging behind the manufacturing price there for a while, or the gap wasn't as much this winter. So actually when we came into the spring, our actual price of milk was actually as high as it was all winter. So in terms of feed, look, just for our own sake, we're better off not to be sending thousands upon thousands out on feed every year anyway. So even if we have a few less cows, that's I can accept it a little bit, but I know, but you don't want to go backwards in cows just for sake. We want to keep our productivity up as much as we can. I think that's the only way for. Well, I won't say it's the only way, but I think it's a way for a lot of farmers, if they are thinking about converting, they'll have to keep the production up because they have loans and cubicle houses or whatever they have those things to pay for probably, and you can't really afford to be dropping in production a whole lot, I don't think.
No, I think particularly in dairy farmers, there's investments put in that cost is there anyway, so it has to be maintained at some level. You're absolutely right. In terms of your cattle, did you do any huge changes in those when you were coming in, or?
In terms of breeding, no, we haven't. But I suppose we were thinking about it with a while, but we hadn't. We didn't overly change. We didn't change it at all.
So
really.
What is your preferred option? Because I know you.
I honestly, I think, I think there's probably a number of breeds that can do well in the system. A lot of people say that you should probably. Go for sort of more smaller, robuster kind of cows, and possibly we'll end up going that way. At the moment, we haven't planned to do that yet. Maybe I have seen organic farmers in the UK that will swear by the Holsteins as well. It's just a case of breeding the right
and land quality,
breeding the right ones. Whether it's an organic cow or a conventional cow, if she's getting good quality feed in front of her, it's just a question of your own economics, whether you think that'll work. How many cows through the parlour, for the amount of litres and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff to bring in for every farm. So, I like cows that have a lot of milk just in general. I don't like milk cows that are half empty going through. But that doesn't necessarily, you don't always do the right thing that way. But
and James, this is probably quite a difficult question, because you've come through 2 droughts and you've come into organic at the same time.
Yeah.
But how has your yield managed over that 6 months?
Like we've probably dropped a little bit, but I suppose there's different reasons for that probably. But one major reason we probably didn't feed as much. Now that's I was looking at the price of it. That was very expensive. But and in conversion, you're still allowed to feed conventional feed, but it
GMO free.
Yeah, but it has to be GMO free.
That's only for dairying, isn't that correct?
Yes, it's just a derogation for dairying in the first 18 months of conversion. The last 6 months you have to feed full organic feed. But what I was finding quite difficult actually was to get rations that you could, there's most rations, when you actually ring around all the mills, they all nearly have GMO feed in them, whether it is maize or soybeans or distillers.
Or the price then is not far off organic feed price, if you know what I mean.
Well, it's still, look, you can get, at the moment I'm feeding rolled barley, straight rolled barley. Now, the millers are afraid that it'll get stuck in my bin, but it hasn't so far, so fingers crossed.
And are you adding anything to that?
No, I'm not. So whatever minerals and stuff I have to feed outside the parlour or whatever. But that's just at the moment. So we'll be switching fairly soon for winter feeding as soon as the cows that are here are cows to calve in the next 2 months. So we'll be switching to a complete winter feed once they're calving. So most of the cows would be kind of, they'd be spring calvers, I suppose, and probably. I suppose they're all pretty much spring calvers now at the moment.
And then getting back to the multi-species, do you think it'll last a little bit longer into the winter for grazing? The way you'll get a little bit more out of white clover in particular. Will you get that with multi-species, that you'd shorten your winter feeding?
Yeah, it's possible. I know around here, compared to the farm I was used to, it was a much drier farm. We would have been nearly able to keep them out all year, some particular years. But I know you probably
I'm
would laugh when
laughing.
I talk about a wet farm.
Yeah.
It's not a wet farm, but it does tend to
Tear up a bit
get a
in
bit
it.
sticky. So it's hard to cut down the winter a lot, and we do have, and you're going to laugh again, but we do have some drained fields. It's what seeds way of putting them. They definitely wouldn't be suitable in the winter. But no, look, I mean.
So when would you be
especially
housing?
after reseeding these, we'd tend to not go too hard on the ground the first year or two anyway.
Oh, yeah.
In general,
Yeah.
and we've a lot of ground like that this year. So, but usually full housing maybe around the early November, middle of November,
Okay,
that kind of way. But like you could be in and out
Yeah.
anytime from October, really. Depend like.
Yes, of course. And if you get frost, would you let them back out again now? Periods of.
Yeah, like we'd say, yeah, if the ground was good enough,
Yeah.
I don't mind grazing any time, really. If the ground is good enough, we don't. Look, it's nice for the cows to get out at times in the winter as well, because it takes the pressure off the housing as well, and they get to lie down and they're more comfortable and what have you. But they don't want to go out if it's a bad day. So
Yeah.
you kind of gauge them. If they're standing at the gate looking to go out, then they're probably right most of the time.
And on that, because with 200 cows, that's a significant amount of housing. Had you a lot of changes to do to meet the organic standard?
Yeah, well, we did. We have some new housing put up anyway, and we kind of knew that anyway.
And was that slatted?
There's a slatted section where the cows are feeding, but it's actually straw bedding, and we have been straw bedding
even before you went organic.
Yeah, ever since we've come here, we put the shed up first and ask questions later.
Okay.
Kind of the way
And why is, because you don't often come across.
Well, we're in a big dairy area, but there's a lot of tillage around here as well. I know there's no actual exact neighbour here that's in tillage, but there's tillage. There's a lot of tillage within 2 or 3 miles of here. So at times we were able to get the straw pretty cheap, and it's after getting very expensive the last couple of years. But
But it was a preferred option over slats.
I know myself and my father always had arguments over this, but I always maintained the cows would you lose less cows with injuries and stuff like that with the straw, and the dung from the straw farm manure was very, very good. I always felt it was better than slurry. So I know there is more management in some ways than cubicles, but you also have less slurry to deal with as well. So,
Yeah.
but we recently did a job over there, so we extended our feed passage and our shed in general, because we were a little bit tight on space. We were kind of bedding them every day. Now I probably would still bed them every day, but just a little bit. I reckon probably use less straw this year because they have more space.
Yes, okay. And I think it's an important consideration in the sense that, some people when they're converting to organic change their shed because the rules tell them they have to change. But the fact that some people also would consider that from an animal welfare perspective and a long-term investment in your herd, that the straw bedded could work much better, and also the dung coming back out would be an interesting consideration.
Yeah, well, I know even around here, if every other dairy farmer was doing the same thing, I don't think there'd be enough straw to go around. Now I know a lot of farmers wouldn't go near it, just personal preference as well, because bedding cows every day, there's a bit of work on it, but when you see them lying down just after putting in a new bed of straw, and you said they couldn't be more comfortable than this. So and I couldn't tell you if they have a lot more milk when it's like that, but I know there's good cubicles too, but it suited us down to the ground. We didn't have to do anything to change our buildings.
And it's an awful lot cheaper housing to do it that way.
Well, the first day, we put up a shed. We just put up a warehouse shed, basically, and we didn't, at the time, I suppose we didn't. We had a milking parlour in, but we didn't know if we were going to have 200 cows, I suppose, at the time. So we always had the option to change what we were doing. So that was kind of, and that still is a consideration when having an open shed.
Yeah, of course,
because like down the road, look, we're probably fairly committed to dairying now at the moment, but even to cut down numbers wouldn't be a disaster. You're not stuck with a bunch of cubicles they're not going to be used.
Yeah, of course, absolutely, yeah. And then, in terms of, I heard you talk before about how your animals took to the multi-species after a little bit of
Yeah.
newness to them, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
all of a sudden the and this seems to be a trend. Their palate configures almost to the multi-species and the preferred than over everything else. Is that your long-term view, as in?
Well, yeah, like in general, I think it's along the lines of a little bite of something, is always good. If you had all chicory or if you had all cocksfoot, if you had all ryegrass, they're kind of going to be sick of it. Whereas they'll even cocksfoot is a grass that no one seems to like. It seems to grow very well here. And I don't think you'd want to have a full monoculture of it, but they will eat it, and it will, it grows well during the year as well. But it's kind of, I think it's kind of more of a balanced diet thing than anything else, But once they got used to it, yeah, they took to it, yeah. So.
And is there a danger something like cocksfoot would take over?
There probably is, but I don't know how you get to that exactly, but there hasn't been a huge amount of cocksfoot in our mixes, but you can see it at times, and it actually grows particularly well in spring as well.
Yeah.
It actually grows a small bit earlier than ryegrass, so, and it grows in summer when it's hot as well. So it's actually, I know it doesn't test as well for energy and that kind of stuff. So there's probably a reason why it's not dominant in the mix. But no, I just think a little bit of everything is what they want, like yourself, I suppose.
Yeah, we all like a bit of variety. Tell me this: you mentioned earlier you kind of have it down to how you establish. What is your?
Yeah, like I suppose pre our changeover, we would have probably burned off field and disked it. We haven't ploughed in a couple of years. We've disked maybe 2 or 3 times. So this spring now, since we're in conversion, we did it into established fields of grass, and it worked out pretty well as well. Now you'd probably, with docks, you probably multiply them sometimes. It's not perfect 100%, but still pretty happy with it. I wasn't sure for a while, but in general, even the biggest standout weed, would say, last year or two was probably thistles, and some of them are the spear thistle is the one that will go out of it after 2 years normally, or with topping or whatever. We haven't seen much nettles, but docks, they seem to eat docks. Maybe it's because of less nitrogen. That's a kind of a theory of mine.
Yeah, I think I heard somebody else say that as well.
So, yeah.
But
the chicory competes against the docks anyway, so you don't see the docks building up over years inside.
I was going to say you don't see them as much in the field. But can I ask you? But was that stitching into previously reseeded ground?
Not recently, no.
Okay, because sometimes permanent grassland gets that mat. I don't know.
It's hard, yeah. It depends on time of year. If you went in here now in the start of August, you'd probably fail with a disc harrow, You probably wouldn't have got anywhere. But we did it at a pretty good time, I suppose. But we did it over a few weeks, so we kind of gave it a little shot and came back a couple of weeks later and did it again.
Okay.
So maybe that helped us.
With a broadcast, was it?
No, it was used. We have a direct drill.
Okay.
So yeah, and we set all our crops with that anyway. So, but yeah, so. What else would you say about it? We have done it everywhere. We've ploughed the first field we did. We ploughed. Now it was a very good take, and if you are concerned about it, I would say plough. Now we're not ploughing because we're trying to get away from ploughing because is there too much turning over the soil or whatever. But I wouldn't discount shallow ploughing. Or disking, so you definitely have to do something. You have to do some disturbance in the soil. You can't just
hope for the best.
Imagine it into the ground. I heard a pretty good explanation of it as well about, say, overseeding. I know overseeding can be fairly successful with ryegrass and white clover, and a lot of people will tell you that. But the deeper rooting species don't tend to do as well, and that's it because they have to send down a deep root before they start really growing up. And the grass will be back by then, and it's just out-competed. So we haven't found it successful here. You'd see the odd plant around the field, but for the amount of seeds you use up, you'd be better off to do it right.
Okay. And you did say earlier that you wondered about your management of that the herbs are thinning out and you after a certain age. I've seen some stuff that was zero grazed and it was coming back up to nearly this height again.
Yeah.
And so... and they seem to cut lower than what a cow's bite would do. Yeah. So the whole idea that you have to graze chicory high is probably not true. But I was speaking to different farmers about this over the last year or so. And there seems to be this idea that it's less about the tight grazing, maybe more about the recovery period. That chicory
probably
needs a longer recovery period.
Yeah, I'd say so. Now, like you can see in the field here today, the chicory is bolting and that. But at times of the year, they're like the plant to be only half up when the grass is ready, and it'd probably be very good for milk. Yeah. But it's probably not fully recovered. And but that's the management. That's a difficult problem. Yeah. Like look, there's times we're able to stretch the rotation a bit longer, and you don't tend to lose as much in quality by stretching the rotation of a multi-species a little bit longer. It's not like what we were assumed of with not grass. With ryegrass. Like with ryegrass, it goes like timber. Like you're going to get no milk out of it, and they won't eat it. If it goes to seed, so you have to end up topping it all the time. And do you do any of the topping now? This stuff that's going to flower, will you? Well, this summer we didn't particularly do a lot of topping, because when it got dry, our experience over the years will tell you that if you go and top, you're going to end up having a very open soil then, and you're probably going to make your drought worse for yourself. So we just left it away there. Even though you say it might look a bit nicer if we topped it or whatever. But we found that the taller stuff was holding in more moisture. There, even when it was the hottest days, there was dampness at the bottom of the plant. Okay. The dew was catching on a lot better, and they held on way later into the drought than some of the other fields looked like we were gone out of organic for a little while there. With looked like it was Roundup gone out in it again. So not you at night, no. I've heard of that. No, not around here. With the whole crop, we were always growing whole crop wheat and maize mixing? And that kind of stuff. Yeah. We have a lot of experience of that. We've been growing that with 40 years. Well, back to my father's time, I hadn't much to do with it at that time. But, we were always growing it. We were putting out loads of slurry on it, loads of fertilizer, and getting good crops. But the ground seemed to be just getting worse and worse over years. There seemed to be no worms left, and we, along with doing this multi-species, we started to put in mixed crops. So, and we started putting cover crops as well, wherever we could on the ground. So we have the outside blocks. From here are the place where we did most of the tillage. There was a couple of smaller blocks where we used to have heifers on years ago and that kind of stuff. It might be a 13-acre block or whatever, and it's very hard to manage different places, as a lot of fellas find out. So and they were very suitable for tillage anyway. So sometimes we brought the silage up here, and it's a long draw. It's 20 miles away, but we would have. We changed over a little bit to trying to grow a grain legume with our cereals. Now we haven't figured out what to grow with maize yet. Hopefully we will at some stage. But we started off with a combi crop, kind of peas, oats, and barley together, and we got on well with that. It was very low cost. There was no spray, it was a fairly good quality silage. It didn't yield crazy yield, but it was still a good crop. So, like I do remember one time we grew whole crop wheat, and I went over the field 5 times between spraying and fertilizer, and the cost of it, I never liked the idea of getting spray on myself either, from drift into the tractor and in the gap in the window or whatever. Yeah. And it was also a nuisance. So I'd always been looking out for
different approach.
for some other way of growing. How could we grow these cereals without spraying?
Yeah.
All the reps would tell you, no, you can't do that. And they were probably right in a lot of ways, but in the system we were in,
Yeah.
definitely it seems that the nitrogen makes the cereal crops more prone to disease. And what we're finding is that the disease isn't as bad when there's a mixture of, let's say, peas with barley or whatever. There's a kind of a dead host for different diseases, so it doesn't pass as easy through a field. And what you're aiming with the whole crops is that the crops mature at the same time. Now, it's not as critical as it is for the combine. As it is, when you're doing whole crop, you can go in a bit earlier or whatever. So you can just pick your day. It doesn't have to be overly dry. If it's dry overhead, you nearly can cut it.
And this again is for winter feed for the cows.
It's for winter feed, yeah. So we'd be hoping we get enough energy in. I think there's a lot of protein in our silages for multi-species. There's enough of protein, I think. Once you kind of go above 16% in the whole diet, you have nearly enough. So I think the limiting factor for winter milk is energy after that. But growing the grain legume, peas or beans together with the other thing, you're supplying the nitrogen. So that's kind of, this year we grew wheat and beans together. And I haven't tested it out, I haven't fed any of it yet. But it looked like a good crop. It yielded pretty well, I think. It was a good thick stand. There was some weeds in it, not overly bad. It was fine for cows. It doesn't have to be perfect for cows. So,
yeah.
And we're probably going to do a rotation around some of the fields as they need to be reseeded with the multi-species. We'll probably try and do a couple of years of whole crop.
Okay, and then you'll be...
And then I'll be back to it again.
So you'll be reseeding multi-species after the whole crop again.
Yeah, so if there was 10% of the farm to be done every year, just like what would have been the case before, you could do that with a whole crop for a couple of years as you're going around the fields.
And is all your land... can you do that in all the fields?
No, some of the fields wouldn't be suitable for that. And but the ones that are, I suppose, we'll probably hit them more often if they need to be done. So what we did the last couple of years, we've concentrated on the fields that needed reseeding most. But the whole crop idea, we're kind of going a bit more intensive on that now.
And do you think you can grow maize organically here yet?
I don't think you could grow it on its own. I think you'd probably need a legume with it, but I'm trying to figure out what one will go with it. I don't know, maybe some kind of climbing bean or something. Okay,
maybe the audience at BioFarm will have
maybe they might have an idea. Plenty of answers on the postcard there, please. I know a problem with maize would be weed control within the rows, because any time I've ever seen a field not sprayed, it just got thick with weeds because there's such a big space between the plants, and it doesn't do well with the competition.
So
if you can put another plant in there, even if it's a low-growing plant, and even if it doesn't really make much difference to the silage, if you can keep the weeds down at least, you might have some chance. But look, I mean, there's disadvantages to maize as well, because maize is late in the year for harvesting, and you can do a bit of damage in the field. So maybe we might be better off in the longer run. Maybe not just forget about that idea.
It's not the holy grail.
No, it's not the holy grail, but it just means that if you do have a field that you are rotating, you could probably do peas and oats or something one year, wheat and beans the next year, maize and something else the next year. And you could extend the rotation, especially for us on our outside blocks.
Where you don't have...
Where we don't have we can't really graze it so easy. And we'd say, we have one field we put into red clover this year, and there's great crops of it, but it's 3 crops and 3 cuts, or maybe even 4 probably this year. So it's kind of hard to draw that up the road. It makes more sense to draw a 1-cut crop a bit of distance. So, those kind of things are coming into play as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now, I want to ask you a few questions about, well, you're a little bit early, I suppose, but have you seen your workload increase when you moved to organic?
It probably should have increased. Sorry, I'd say like the biggest thing would be probably not able to spray under the ditches, you know. And I know we've been trying to leave our hedgerows grow a little bit longer anyway because.
It is a real problem, though, isn't it?
The electric fence wire. The electric
yeah.
fence wire has to be looked after.
Yeah.
And I can't say I'm the number one best guy at that, but it'll probably mean that we're probably going to have to get a hedge cutter in a bit more often. We usually used to only do the road ditch on the outside, maybe in our driveway. But we'll probably have to do a little bit more.
Yeah.
Probably adjust the wire. Maybe the wire goes out further.
And you get in behind it.
You can actually get in behind it, yeah. And I think that's probably the way to go.
Yeah, it's a few rare breed cattle that lay briars, maybe.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised. The odd time you'd see one take a bite, but I don't know. They eat a whole lot more than that, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's like everything else. They'll only eat it when they haven't got something, a breakfast in front of them or lunch. But yeah, it's funny. It's coming up all the time now, and it's something that I probably hadn't thought of. But is
well, also as well, even the wires in between paddocks, we're kind of thinking about raising the wire a little bit so we can go in under with the mower. I know you're going to get caught at a stake, but that you can get some of them anyway.
And you know. As standard practice in a normal situation, do you think it is a good job to top at certain times of the year the multi-species? Or is it just because you want the neatness of it?
Well, I suppose there is a case to top it occasionally, I'd say, but. Maybe, you know, in our system, maybe the easiest way to do that would be to pick and choose your fields for silage. And, you know, in terms of cleaning it off or whatever, I don't know is the honest answer to that. No, you might get a short-term benefit, but in the longer term, how long the sward will last is the question more so than, you know.
And is it maybe a throwback to managing grassland as much as anything else?
It might be. But look, I mean, with the cows, we move them twice a day. We give them their allocation and you move them on. You know, if you left them into a field like this and, you know, they would probably pick out all the clover first and maybe the chicory, and then they might leave the grass to last the moment. Another time of the year they might do the opposite way around. So, you know, I know some dairy farmers, they have you know, they don't move the wire every milking. They might have a 3-day paddock or something. I wouldn't attempt that here because I know it would happen. They'd end up looking at me at the wire, you know.
That evening anyway.
They'd be, you know, they're better off getting their allocation every time. But if you went the other way around about it, you'd probably have to top if you're.
And just on that point, then, is if you're moving them twice a day, are you leaving quite a bit of cover behind you? Are they trampling that almost like a mob grazing?
Well, I suppose it depends on the day. It depends on the day. If it's like Sunday now was a desperate wet day, you wouldn't think it today. Yeah. There was probably a couple of inches of rain fell on Sunday, and. You kind of, I actually brought him in for a little bit of silage that day, but you know, I figured they're going to make a mess if I leave him out. So it depends on the day. Like, you know, I might give him a little bit more even on a day like that sometimes, and just be a little bit more forgiving about the residuals. You know, I'm not as worried about residuals as I was before. To put it that way, like, you know, about leaving a bit behind, and like. Sometimes you don't give them enough, and they'll skin it off more, and like there is some kind of a happy medium there. Like, I mean, I know one time we were cutting silage and we had 2 mowers at slightly different height because we couldn't bring the top link back enough on the front mower. The front mower was cutting a bit tighter than the other one, and you could see that there was more grass coming back on the one that was cut a little bit higher. You know, so to take that little half an inch extra, it meant probably 3 or 4 days of grazing.
Yes.
Back or sooner.
Yeah. The recovery period was shorter.
Yeah, so there probably is a magic point there, you know.
Yeah, and I think that, and then maybe it also that actually equates to maybe the different plants in the field as well. That some of them will respond, which is the thing that we probably don't look at in multi-species. Is do some of them have different recovery periods?
Yeah.
And is that the limiting factor?
Well, I don't know why you're asking me the questions. I don't actually know the answer to this.
You know what the title.
No, it's just it's. Yeah, we're learning as we're going along. I don't know, and
there's no probably wrong or right way.
Someone in the questions will probably have a better answer than me, and like I'd love to know the answer to it, but I find it more forgiving though. Like, would say, you see it a lot, and we've done it ourselves loads of times, where you cut silage, cut bales or something, and the next thing, a week or two later, you're feeding that silage out again because you got caught in a very small little bit of a drought. Where with this stuff, you can leave it going a little bit longer. Say if it is fit for cutting silage and you kind of, right, how are we hitting into a dry period now? You could just say, look, I won't bother cutting that for silage and leave it on a little bit longer, and you won't have a big fall in milk. So you can play around there a little bit, I think, and would say there's nothing more expensive than feeding out bales you just made.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
A couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Especially when it's only 3 weeks later, you know. So, and it happens all the time. And like fellas do it to keep quality in their swards. And like I don't feel that we've had to do that as much.
Okay.
With this.
And from a, I suppose, and this is nothing to do with your organic perspective or anything like that, but why you're a little bit more on the multi-species than a lot of people, or you're on it a little while longer. Do you think it's building resilience on the farm in the sense of that drought management, or that, or even that? Well, you probably don't. I know you don't have wet periods down here like the way we would, so that's no point in asking that question. But do you see, you know, one of the great difficulties I've always thought is, if you go back 20 years ago, every farm, regardless of what they were doing, whether it's beef, sheep, or anything else, they always built that little bit of resilience into the farm. There was always. It now seems that every inch has to be maximised all the time. But can things like multi-species truly build that soil health, that organic matter, that your farm is less exposed to short, sharp, whether it's drought periods or whatever, you know?
Well, from what I've seen so far, it has. You know, the longer term, look, like I said there before about the, you know, even if these herbs are gone, our red clover isn't going to last. Like we all know, red clover only lasts 3-4 years maybe at the most. But having those in there is a nice bonus for the first couple of years. But if you put in enough of fairly good grasses and you know, if you could find some more legumes or whatever, you probably should put them in as much as you can at the start. I know there a lot of 6 species mixes went in this year especially, and from my own perspective, I don't think there's enough of different species that gone in there, because they're not. They still have ryegrass in there, which is very exposed to drought. They, you know, and to have, you know, even with ryegrass, you wouldn't be sure that lasted very long either. You could have wildgrass coming back in a few years' time, whereas I would say multi-species is very easy to see if chicory is gone. But you know, the resilience, every time we've had a weather sort of something or other, some kind of cold or heat or whatever, it didn't seem to matter. The crops still seemed to come. And you could see, we still had fields side by side that we could see the difference.
So, with your experience now, when you're buying, we'll say seed, for example, do you buy a blend, or do you buy and say, well, I want a bit of this and a bit of that, and this is going to be my mix, my James Foley mix? Well,
from the start, we threw everything in that we could get to see what would grow here. Because you never know what's going to grow on your farm. Like we tried Sandfine and Lucerne, and they seem to be amazing plants, but you have to have your pH probably above 7 to get them to grow at all. We haven't even seen them hardly come out of the ground. Now I'd love to see some more plants that are native to Ireland, or that grow well in Ireland, because I know a lot of these seeds don't come from Ireland. Well, actually none of them come from Ireland. Do I make my own blend? Yeah, I've left out a couple of things that we initially put in. And but I still try to leave in as much as possible, and I still try to, if there is something out there that we haven't tried before, throw them in as well. But I'm not particularly fussy, like whereas I have to have such and such a type of ryegrass or such and such a type of varieties, whatever. You know, I've never gone down that road, but I've tried different seed companies. They all have different, slightly different mixes, and you know, mostly I try to find the one that has the most species in it, and most of the time, even amongst the different seed companies, they seem to be the better mix.
And you mentioned red clover a couple of times as part of your mixes. Do you find difficulty with that and the cows grazing, that they damage it, or is that not a big an issue when it's a part of a mix as opposed to almost a pure stand for silage making?
I don't know is the answer to that. Because, well, I don't have a lot of experience of it just for silage. We have a field of red clover silage that's in, it's its second year. It's been growing really well. But yeah, like during the drought, I know there's another field that we planted last year as well that is quite a big field that when things are getting kind of tough, this field was left and there was an awful lot of red clover in it, and the cows held up in the milk. They probably went up in the milk at a time when I was expecting them to go down, because I had left the cover get fairly high.
Yeah.
And I've been just kind of saving it as long as I could, because I knew it was like if you can leave the rotation from 21 days to 28 days, or even to 35 or even 40 days, you're actually adding more than you think in the last 5 or 6 days in terms of growth. And I know it was damp down the bottom, so it stayed growing. But the red clover, like, it's a brilliant plant. I mean, I'd love it if it was a proper perennial, like, but
Yeah, but did the cows damage? I suppose that was my point in the sense.
Yeah, like,
physically damage it, because you hear an awful lot of talk that you shouldn't overgraze it. Calves only, almost.
Yeah, well, look, I see it coming back. I see it coming back. I will say, I look at the first paddock we put in 2018. It was there probably till the third year, I'd say. Yeah,
okay,
I can't say that it's not as heavy in the mix as a silage blend
But
would
it's
be.
not
So it wouldn't have been, and maybe some of the varieties are more upright than that. I think they're probably less likely to.
But I wonder, does it do okay in terms of as part of an overall multi-species mix?
It does it does definitely for the first couple of years anyway.
Yeah.
I think it can last pretty good for that amount of time. Possibly if you had it in a pure stand, you might be getting open patches or whatever. But if you've got a good enough mix that, even some of the mixes are putting in creeping red fescue grass, and that keeps down the ground and keeps the thing from opening up. And white clover as well. If you've got enough of white clover in there, that spreads on the ground as well. So that's what I found in the first paddock we had, that the white clover took over eventually. So if you have enough of white clover in there, if you have enough of white clover in the mix as well, that hopefully that'll be left as well. So to take over from the red.
Great. Okay, James, I think that's us.
Yeah. It wouldn't. Well, I don't know which one of you wouldn't stop talking. I'm very happy to say that we obviously have James here up on stage with us now. James, that was really interesting, and something that struck me was that you're not afraid to give something a go. But I'm wondering, when Joe Kelleher was talking earlier about the different profiles of people that become organic dairy farmers, looking at the different profiles, it's a bit like which character from Sex and the City are you, or something like that. But what profile do you think you fitted into?
Yeah, I noticed that Joe had a slide up about not worrying about what the neighbours think. And I've actually come to think like that the biggest thing you're worried about the neighbours is what you think the neighbours think, rather than what the neighbours actually think. So I don't know. I suppose I'm kind of old enough and bold enough now to kind of have my own opinion on things. And look, I genuinely am not worried about the neighbours think. Because if I admitted that, I'd be, I wouldn't try anything, I suppose. But look, it's not necessarily something I worry about.
We did get a question in from Barry O'Donoghue, and it was on what the neighbours thinking. But do you think they're thinking they're a little bit jealous this year when you think about the fertiliser bills they were facing, or the feed bills that they were facing?
I don't know what they think of me now, but I was at a funeral a couple of years ago when we had chicory first, and it was just starting to go to seed, and it was the blue flower on it, and the neighbour just kind of half whispered to me, he's like, what's the weed with the blue flower, and he was almost afraid to say it to me out loud. But I tend to be talking to people that are generally farther away than my closest neighbours, but I can't say what they think, because I don't know. You know.
We will take questions from the floor as well, but I have some myself. You mentioned whole crop, and when you talk about whole crop silage, are you putting that in a pit or are you putting
Yes.
that into bales?
No, into a pit.
And
yeah.
do you have any kind of vermin deterrent or anything like that? Are you worried about that?
Well, I know Claude is in the audience there now. She got this sort of, I think it's a thing using gas to kind of, they come in and they get a shot with a ball to the head or something. But we haven't really put it up and running yet. But yeah, look, vermin obviously, like, you know, maize is worse, I think, than whole crop. The last couple of years we've tended to try and get a cut of silage in on top of it at the same time to kind of keep birds, especially from the top of the pit. And but yeah, look, where there's feed available, you're going to have vermin. So it's just a case of trying to cut down the feed face as much as possible to keep them back from it, and maybe some of these other methods to try and get rid of rats and whatever is well, I wouldn't be the best person to talk to about that, but I know there probably is solutions there.
And so something, because when I don't know if you know this, but I was looking at Guernseys a while ago, and I know that you have some Guernseys.
Yeah.
Are you looking at A2 milk? And for people who don't know, there's an A1 type of milk, there's an A2 type of milk. A2 is associated with people who might be lactose intolerant, find it easier to digest. Are you interested in that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, we've actually, on the rest of our herd, we've actually been using all A2 sires for a couple of years, just in case the opportunity came up. Now, with the Guernseys, we brought in 15 there 2 years ago, and we're kind of, you know, exploring kind of a niche market for them, for ourselves, possibly do a bit of processing on farm. But look, we're not there yet, but you know, from what, you know, we've experimented at home, and you know, it makes great butter, and most of the people that have Guernseys in the UK tend to have a niche market, whether it's ice cream or specialist cheeses and stuff, but almost all of them have a market for it, you know, direct to consumer market.
We have a question from online, Lucy Tottenham. How low do you graze your multi-species?
Yeah, I think, as I was saying to Sean there, it kind of depends on the day, but it depends on if I don't give him enough some days as well. But look, we try not to go as severe as we would for the kind of golf ball grazing that we would be the kind of standard practice for ryegrass. It doesn't tend to work out as much because you tend to overgraze the likes of the chicory. You might have certain herbs you could graze down to the clay, but and then there'll be other bits sticking up. So it just depends, and you kind of have to have a happy medium, I think.
And we're going to hear a talk on mob grazing later on. Would you ever consider that?
Yeah, I suppose the biggest fear would be the longer you leave the rotation, you know, that you might impact the quality of the feed. But I would say it's definitely good for the soil. I haven't tried it enough, I suppose, to really know, but I'm pretty sure Nicole Masters last year said that the longer you're into it, the more sort of access to minerals and everything else, the qualities it holds better.
I sometimes wondering if you're in a suckler or a dairy system, if it makes a difference. Sean, do you have any thoughts that you want to come in with?
No, I think, you know, we had Gabe Brown over there this year, and he's probably more focused on the adaptive grazing, holistic management, and he seemed to think, you know, if you take all the systems, particularly if you wanted to move to an organic one, he felt that this was the easiest one and his total focus, he's no ego about yield at all. It was always about profit. And he said it was the easiest system to work, and you do it in your own context, what suits you, rather than standard 2 days here or 1 day move or whatever. And that it worked really, really well, particularly in an organic system. It was one of the easiest ones.
Does anyone have any questions from the floor? Oh yeah, here we go.
James, Noel Scott here. I was just wondering, how well does the multi-species mix recover if you take a cut of silage off it, or maybe a couple of cuts? Is that possible?
Yeah. We've got side-by-side red clover and multi-species in our outside block, and the red clover did very, very well this year now, especially in the drought, but the multi-species seems to do well under silage as well. The herbs tend to, I would say, they possibly even last better than they do under grazing. That was something we were kind of worried about before, was the cutting height of chicory especially. But in terms of the silage itself, we've got initial silage results there, and the DMD of the multi-species is quite high. I think we've got to test a little bit over 80, which I never saw that before, whether that's an aberration or not. But the mineral content tends to be higher in most of the minerals, So and for silage, I wouldn't have any qualms about using it for silage at all. I think it's you're onto a good thing whether you have red clover or multi-species. Pretty much, yeah.
We have a question from online, Kevin O'Hanlon. Kevin, I feel like you're having a go at me if you're trying to sideline fodder beet or beet of the industry before. James, would you ever consider fodder beet instead of maize?
Possibly not, because I think the ground we have is a little bit too sticky. There's not enough I'd say you want to be in kind of sandy land to kind of think about it, but for the harvesting of it and the things. But yeah, look, I know there was a guy at BioFarm a couple of years ago that was getting great crops of fodder beet organically, but it's, possibly, look, maybe even for grazing, maybe more so than actually for harvesting. But no, look, fodder beet is a great crop, and we've fed a lot of it over the years, and it's good to get cows to milk, so I wouldn't leave any option off the table that way.
Have you ever had any issues with bloat? It was raised earlier.
No.
No. And why do you think that is?
Well, even going back to before we started into multi-species and that, we always had white clover and ryegrass swards, and usually what we felt was, this even when we were using nitrogen, that once the cows were used to it and had it in most of our fields, you usually wouldn't see a problem. But no, I know back in the 80s, my father he would have had white clover and ryegrass as well, but he would have been spreading up to 400 units of nitrogen, which would have been, off the scale of today's, and like he did get bloat that time. And as Mike was saying earlier, Mike Welch was saying there earlier on, it does seem that a lot of the problem is nitrogen poisoning rather than the actual clover, but the clover itself takes up that nitrogen quickly, and that's why it's worse than with grass alone.
There's a question from online, but I think you've answered it in terms of injecting or direct sowing red clover seed or deeper rooted species. And from memory, you were saying that the deeper rooted species, it was a waste of time to do anything except try to direct sow them in.
Yeah, that's the experience we've had so far anyway. And the explanation we got was just that it took longer for the roots to get down, and it does seem to work pretty well with ryegrass and white clover. So maybe that is the answer. I'm not sure about that, but yeah.
Can I ask you, once a day milking, what's your thoughts on it?
You're
a yield person.
I think open-mindedness was something else that was mentioned. Of all the things, open-mindedness to once a day milking probably wouldn't be on my agenda at the moment. But look, I mean, I think that it depends on how much milk the cows have, really. If you're a higher yielding system, it couldn't countenance once a day milking. But if you're a lower input system, which look, we may end up being in the end, maybe you'd start thinking about it then. But at the moment, I'd say the cows have too much milk for it, and I wouldn't think about it at the moment,
Well, if you want to offload some Guernseys, bring them out. Okay. Sean, do you have anything you want to add?
I was just going to say, when we're talking about once a day milking, our host here is actually an organic raw milk producer herself, and she doesn't always talk about it. So if anybody's wanting to look at what she does, you can see Temple Road Dairy, and she sells. And again, it touches on what Joe was talking about earlier. She actually direct sells her milk into, is Urban Co-op one of your places?
Yeah, I should say, Sean Condon is the superstar of this equation. I just tag along and do what he tells me to do most of the time. We don't always agree, but I usually do. And we're direct selling some of the milk. And hopefully pushing it a bit more. So yeah, Sean was here last year, and I think he told Ella on the day that he doesn't have a website. So we do now have a website, and Instagram as well. One more question from the floor there.
Hi, James. Just a question relating to multi-species sward silage. Have you any tips on how to preserve it as silage compared to, say, what you do with a perennial ryegrass monoculture?
Yeah. I know there's been a lot of talk about wilting the silage and that kind of stuff, but I suppose what we found is in the last few years we've actually not dried our silage as much as what we would have previously. We tried to pick it up maybe the following day, if conditions are good enough, of course. But you know, secondary fermentation, all that kind of thing is a problem if you have your silage too dry. And oftentimes you see silage out in the field and it's there for maybe 2 days, and you know it's dry on top and it might be damp underneath. And but we've tended to just head it out usually and bring it back in the following day. But yeah, look, we've we've been happy enough with it that way. It has preserved pretty well, so I wouldn't be too worried about it. Yeah.
My final short question. Joe is down there and he's dying to get more farmers like you to convert to dairy. What would you say to convince them? Or to organic dairy?
I don't know. I'm probably one of the only people that have joined organic this year that didn't actually go to any organic meeting whatsoever.
Shh, don't say that.
Claude told him to do.
Yeah, Claude gave me the kick. Yeah. Get Claude onto it there. And
Yeah.
no, look. In general, like I would say, it's a case of, even if you don't go fully organic, I'd say to cut down your costs just as a commercial farmer, to get these legumes in, get these multi-species in, because it's going to save you a huge pile of cost without really losing a whole lot of yield. Now, if you want to retain the right to be able to buy in feed, commercial whatever price as against an organic price, then you might make that decision. But if you're, I would say just from a commercial point of view, we're doing this from a commercial point of view. We don't have any sort of ideology about organic farming or whatever, but we wanted to do it because we figured we'd do better on our farm, So we found that our forage, we've held up our yields. So I wouldn't have any qualms telling someone to kind of look into it fairly strongly. But as has been said earlier, we didn't cut down our nitrogen overnight. 2 years might not be quite enough to do it in, but maybe 3 or 4 years. I've cut back for a year or two, and this is even without multi-species swards. I'd say you could cut back your nitrogen drastically. And look, with a beef or dairy system, I'd say we really should be recycling our nutrients on farm. There's very little of it actually leaving the farm in terms of PK, calcium, all these things. Very, 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 very little actually leaving your farm. So, why should we be bringing all these minerals in? It doesn't kind of make sense to me. Otherwise, maybe we're losing it into the atmosphere, or we're losing it down our streams, or, we should be recycling those nutrients, and that's where I'd start. And look, if we could get to the premium market eventually, then for organic, then all the better. So I think we've got to crawl before we can walk, I suppose.
Okay, James, thank you very much.
Okay.
We